Winter pressed its will against the Montana Valley, hard and unyielding. The Radcliffe ranch house stood broad and still beneath a slate sky, its windows catching the last copper of dusk like embers refusing to die. Inside, the fire burned low, casting long shadows that climbed the timbered walls and retreated again, as if the house itself breathed in memory and out regret. Ethan Radcliffe lay back in the long chair of his study, boots off, coat folded with habit rather than care. His dark hair, streaked with early silver, fell across a brow furrowed by years of work and loss. His eyes were closed. To any passerby, he would have appeared asleep, another night surrendered to exhaustion. But beneath the stillness, his heart beat hard, alert, testing. 3 years had taught him how to feign rest. Grief had taught him how to watch without being seen. A soft knock brushed the door, almost swallowed by the wind outside. Ethan did not move. The door opened with a careful sigh. Amara Bennett stepped in, light as a question. She carried a basin of warm water in both hands, steam lifting into the firelight. Her plus-size figure moved with practiced quiet, a balance of gentleness and strength shaped by long days of labor. Her brown skin glowed softly in the room's amber haze. She wore a simple work dress and apron, both clean, both mended more than once. Her curls were tied back loosely, a few strands escaping to frame cheeks warmed by the fire and the effort of climbing the stairs. She paused, eyes flicking to Ethan's face. He did not stir. Amara knelt, setting the basin down with care so it would not clink against the floor. The sound of water settling was the only movement in the room. For a moment, she simply breathed, steadying herself. Then she reached for his foot. The first touch was tentative, respectful. Her fingers were warm, her palms firm but gentle as she lifted his calloused foot into the basin. The water whispered around his skin. Ethan felt the heat at once, a quiet shock traveling up his leg and lodging in his chest. He did not open his eyes. He wanted to know what she would do if she believed him truly gone to rest, what kindness looked like when it was unobserved. Amara dipped the cloth and wrung it out carefully. She moved slowly, not to wake him, she thought, but also as if slowness itself were a form of reverence. The cloth passed over cracked skin and the scars of long rides and winter storms. She did not rush past the roughness. She lingered, pressing just enough, as though acknowledging the work etched there. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had known touch, firm handshakes, the jostle of men at market, the ache of reins pulled hard against frozen fingers. This was different. This was care offered without demand. She worked in silence for a time. Then, almost without realizing it, she spoke. Her voice was low, meant only for the room. "You carry the cold in your bones," she murmured, not accusing, not pitying. Warmth helps it let go. The word struck him deeper than he expected. He kept still. Amara rinsed the cloth and moved to his other foot. Her movements grew surer, as if the work itself steadied her. When she finished washing, she dried each foot carefully, tucking the blanket higher over his legs. She hesitated, glancing again at his face, still asleep. She reached into her apron and drew out a small tin, its surface worn smooth by use. She opened it, and the clean, green scent of herbs rose into the room. She warmed the balm between her hands, then paused, uncertain. Slowly, with a decision made in her breath, she took his hands instead. Ethan felt the contact like a held note. Her fingers traced the lines in his palms, the cracks and calluses earned by years of building and burying. She smoothed the balm in with patient strokes, thumbs circling where tension gathered. Her touch was not timid now, but it was careful, as if she feared hurting something already fragile. "These hands work too hard," she whispered. "They shouldn't ache alone."
Something inside him broke its long restraint. Ethan's hand closed gently but firmly around hers. Amara gasped, eyes flying up. Color rushed to her cheeks. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Ethan opened his eyes. The firelight caught in them, dark and searching, no longer hidden. He did not release her hand. He did not pull her closer. He simply held on, grounding himself in the truth of her warmth. "I wasn't asleep," he said quietly. Amara swallowed, her breath unsteady. She nodded once, unable to find words. "Thank you," he added. 2 words, heavy with years unsaid. She withdrew her hand with Pierre, setting the tin down where he could see it, then rose and backed towards the door. She did not run. She did not look away until the threshold claimed her. When the door closed, silence returned, but it had changed. Ethan sat upright, his hands still warm, the scent of herbs lingering. Outside, the winter wind howled as it always had. Inside, for the first time in years, he felt something else entirely. The test was over, and the truth had answered him.
Night settled early over the Montana Valley, heavy with the promise of more snow. The Radcliffe ranch house seemed to draw inward as darkness deepened, its long corridors swallowing sound, its high ceilings holding echoes of a life once fuller. Ethan Radcliffe moved through the hall with the quiet habit of a man long accustomed to solitude. His boots made no sound on the worn boards. He carried the weight of the day in his shoulders, but his mind was elsewhere. Since the night in the study, something had shifted. He found himself listening again, not for danger or duty, but for presence. As he reached the bend near the kitchen passage, a sound stopped him cold. A voice. It rose soft and trembling, weaving through the dark like a thin thread of warmth. It was not loud enough to command attention, not polished enough to impress. It carried sorrow in its notes, but also endurance, the kind learned by those who sing not to be heard, but to survive. Ethan's hand closed around the doorframe as he recognized the source. Amara. She stood at the kitchen basin, sleeves rolled to her elbows, her plus-size frame bent slightly over the work. A single lamp glowed above her, casting a circle of gold against the stone walls. Steam curled up from the washwater, softening her features. Her lips moved gently, shaping the melody of an old spiritual carried north from Virginia, passed through generations that had learned how to endure winters far crueler than Montana's. Each note wavered, imperfect but honest. The song spoke of loss without naming it, of waiting through long nights, of a dawn promised even when unseen. Ethan did not step forward. He did not breathe. The sound reached places he had sealed away. Memories surfaced without mercy. Clara humming as she folded laundry, the child's small voice trying to follow the tune, stumbling, laughing. He had not heard singing in this house since the fever took them both. He had not realized how deeply the absence had hollowed him. Amara's voice faltered on a higher note. She steadied it, drawing strength from the rhythm of her hands in water, from the simple act of finishing what needed to be done. She sang on, unaware of her witness, her eyes lowered, her expression open in a way she never allowed when others watched. When the final line came, her voice softened almost to a whisper. She drew in a breath and lifted her gaze. Ethan stood in the doorway, his tall frame outlined by shadow. The sight of him stole the song from her throat. Her hand slipped, the bowl shattered against the stone floor, the sound sharp and sudden in the hush. "Oh, sir," she gasped, dropping to her knees. Her hands trembled as she reached for the shards. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. I'll clean it at once." Ethan crossed the room in 2 strides and crouched beside her. "Stop," he said, his voice low but firm. His hand met hers over a broken piece. The contact startled them both. Amara froze, her breath caught between apology and fear. Ethan's grip was steady, grounding rather than commanding. "You're bleeding." She shook her head quickly. "It's nothing."
He took her wrist gently, turning her hand to the light. A thin red line marked her skin. Without comment, he reached for a cloth, pressed it to the cut, his movements careful, practiced. Amara watched him, wide-eyed, unused to being tended to. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I sing so the house doesn't feel so empty." The words struck him harder than any accusation could have. He met her gaze, and for a moment the distance between master and servant thinned to almost nothing. "It doesn't disturb me. It helps." She searched his face for mockery and found none. Her shoulders eased a fraction. Mrs. Henderson entered then, drawn by the noise. She frowned at the broken bowl, sighed, and ushered Amara up with a cluck of disapproval that carried more worry than anger. "Be careful, girl," she muttered, then left them to finish. Amara gathered the remaining pieces, her movements subdued now, her song gone. Ethan watched her, a quiet ache settling in his chest, not of grief, but of recognition. When the floor was clean, she stood and bowed her head. "Good night, sir." "Good night, Amara," he replied, using her name without thinking. She paused at the door, surprise flickering across her face, then nodded and disappeared down the corridor. Ethan remained in the kitchen long after she left. The lamp flickered, the water cooled. The house, once a cavern of silence, held the echo of a song that had woken something he thought buried beyond reach. That night, in his bed, sleep came slowly. When it did, it carried no fevered dreams, only the fragile promise of warmth returning, note by note, into a house that had almost forgotten how to listen.
The storm arrived without ceremony, as winter storms often did on the Montana plains. By dawn, snow lay thick against the fences, and the wind drove ice into every crack of the Radcliffe ranch house. Inside, the day began in silence. No clatter of pans from the kitchen, no soft footfalls moving room to room. Ethan Radcliffe noticed at once. He descended the stairs with a frown drawn tight between his brows. For weeks now he had grown accustomed to a new rhythm in the house, small, steady sounds that told him he was not alone. Their absence struck him harder than the cold. "Amara," he called. No answer. He stepped into the kitchen and stopped short. Amara lay slumped across the long table, her apron still tied, her curls fallen loose around her face. A basin half filled with water sat beside her, cloth floating forgotten on the surface. Her plus-size frame, usually moving with quiet purpose, was unnaturally still. Ethan crossed the room in a rush. He pressed his hand to her shoulder. Her skin burned beneath his palm. "Amara," he said again, sharper now, "wake up." Her eyelids fluttered. Gray-brown eyes opened only a fraction, unfocused. Her lips moved, but the words barely formed. "I'm sorry, I didn't finish." The familiar dread surged through him, swift and merciless. He lifted her without thinking, her weight light in his arms despite her curves, her body trembling with fever. The memory of carrying Clara through these same halls clawed at him, but he forced it back. This time would be different. He laid Amara on the long chair near the hearth and covered her with blankets. The fire had burned low. He dropped to his knees and fed it until flames leapt high, throwing warmth and light across her face. Her breathing came fast and shallow. Sweat beaded along her brow. Ethan soaked a cloth and pressed it gently to her skin. He worked with the same care she had shown him, patient, deliberate. Each time her body shuddered, something inside him tightened. Night fell early. Snow battered the windows. He did not leave her side. At times she murmured, fragments of memory slipping loose in the fever. Names, a hymn half sung. Once she whispered his. He leaned closer. "I'm here," he said, the words steady despite the fear pounding in his chest. "You're not alone." Her hand found his, fingers curling weakly. He held on. Hours passed. He changed cloths, fed the fire, watched her breath like a man counting seconds at the edge of a cliff. The house groaned under the storm, but inside all that existed was the fragile life beneath his hands.
Near dawn, her breathing slowed. The burning heat receded. When he touched her brow, it was cooler. Relief washed over him so hard, his knees nearly gave way. She slept then, deep and untroubled. Ethan sank into a chair, eyes never leaving her face. He brushed damp curls from her forehead, a gesture he had not made in years. His hand did not tremble this time. When Amara woke, the light had softened. She blinked, confused, then stilled as she saw him beside her. "Sir," she whispered, trying to rise. "Don't," he said gently, pressing her back. "You're safe." Her eyes filled, not with fear, but with something like wonder. "You stayed." "Yes," he answered simply. In that quiet exchange, something settled between them, solid and undeniable. The line that had once defined their places had blurred further, thinned by shared fear and care. Outside, the storm loosened its grip. Inside, the house held a warmth deeper than fire.
Spring tried to arrive quietly that year, edging its way into the Montana Valley with soft rains and reluctant green. But in town, something else bloomed faster. Whispers. They slid along wooden counters and church pews, lingered in the market air, and sharpened whenever Amara Bennett passed. Ethan Radcliffe heard none of it at first. He was busy mending fences, tallying calves, rebuilding what winter had tried to take. Amara heard everything. At the dry goods store, smiles curved too quickly, and eyes lingered too long. In church, she sat near the back, hands folded, spine straight, listening to murmurs that followed her like a shadow. The maid thinks she's more now. He's gone soft. She'll bring him shame. Each word landed like a small stone, light alone, heavy together. She bore it in silence. That had always been her way. But silence has a limit. One evening, as dusk cooled the yard and lanterns glowed low, Amara sat on the edge of her narrow bed and opened her trunk. Inside lay the few things that had followed her from Virginia: worn dresses, a faded scarf, a pair of shoes mended twice. She folded each with care, her hands steady though her chest ached. Perhaps this was kindness, she told herself, to leave before harm could take root, to step back into shadow where she belonged. A knock sounded. She startled, pushing the lid down too late. Ethan stood in the doorway, hat in hand, his eyes taking in the half-packed trunk, the set of her shoulders. He closed the door behind him. "What are you doing?" he asked. Her gaze kept on the trunk. "What I should have done sooner." He crossed the room in 2 strides and rested his hand on the lid, firm. "Explain." Her voice trembled despite her effort. "They speak about you because of me. I hear it everywhere. I won't be the reason you're mocked." Ethan's jaw tightened. He took her chin gently, lifting her face until she met his eyes. There was no anger there, only resolve, bright and unyielding. "Listen to me," he said. "I buried my wife and child on this land. I lived 3 years answering to ghosts and the opinions of men who never lifted my grief. I will not lose you to whispers." Tears spilled then, silent and hot. "They'll never accept me." "Then they'll answer to me," he replied. That night he made a decision as plain as sunrise. The town hall was alive with music and laughter, boots striking rhythm on wood. Amara entered last, slipping to the back, her dress simple, her presence immediately noticed. Heads turned, murmurs rippled. She wished she were invisible. Then the room shifted. Ethan Radcliffe stepped inside. Conversation faltered. The banjo slowed. He crossed the floor without hesitation, eyes fixed on Amara. He stopped before her and extended his hand. "Come with me." Her breath caught. "Ethan, everyone's watching." "Let them,"
he said, voice carrying. "I'm done hiding." She hesitated only a heartbeat before placing her hand in his. He led her to the center of the room. The music resumed, low and deliberate. His arms circled her waist, steady, protective. They moved together, unhurried. Around them, judgment flickered and failed. Ethan's gaze never left her face. "Lift your head," he murmured. She did. In that moment, Amara felt something break free. The weight of whispers fell away. She was no longer a shadow pulled along by fear. She was seen, chosen. When the song ended, Ethan did not release her. He spoke clearly, without force. "This is Amara Bennett, the woman I choose." Silence held, then scattered applause followed, hesitant, then real. Amara leaned into him, tears bright, smiling through them. That night, the line between them was gone, broken not by rebellion, but by truth, spoken aloud.
Spring settled fully over the Montana Valley at last, gentle and persistent, softening the scars winter had left behind. Snowmelt traced silver paths down the slopes, and new grass pushed through soil once locked in ice. At the Radcliffe ranch, the land breathed again. Fences stood mended. Calves followed their mothers through green pasture. Life, patient and unafraid, had returned. One late afternoon, when the light turned the valley gold, Ethan Radcliffe saddled a horse and reached for Amara's hand. He did not explain where they were going. He did not need to. She mounted behind him, her arms settling around his waist, her cheek resting against the broad strength of his back. The steady rhythm of the horse carried them across open ground, the scent of damp earth and wildflowers filling each breath. They stopped beneath the great cottonwood on the hill. Its roots spread deep and wide, anchoring the earth as it had for generations. At its base stood a small stone, plain and weathered, bearing the names of Ethan's wife and daughter. Amara had seen the tree from afar, but had never stood here. She felt the weight of the place immediately and slowed, unsure. Ethan dismounted and helped her down. For a long moment he said nothing. The wind stirred the leaves overhead, whispering through branches heavy with new growth. "This is where I thought my life ended," he said at last, his voice low. "After they died, I came here and sat until night fell. I told myself there would be no more beginnings." Amara's chest tightened. She did not speak. She did not need to. He turned to her, his eyes no longer shadowed only by grief. "Then you came," he continued, "not with noise, not with demands. You came with warm water and a song in the kitchen and hands that cared when no one was watching." Emotion caught in his throat. He dropped to one knee. There was no ring, no audience, only a man stripped of pretense and a woman who had endured being unseen. "Amara Bennett," he said, steady despite the tremor in his breath. "I have nothing to offer but the truth of myself, a man who has lost and learned and found life again because of you. Be my wife. Walk beside me, not as a servant, not as a shadow, but as my equal." Her tears fell freely now. She knelt before him and cupped his face, her thumbs brushing away the years he had carried alone. "Yes," she whispered, "I will." He rose and gathered her into his arms beneath the cottonwood. In that place of old sorrow, a new vow took root, quiet and unbreakable. Their wedding came with dawn a few weeks later. It was simple, an arch woven from cottonwood branches and wildflowers, a small gathering of townsfolk, a preacher whose voice held kindness rather than judgment. Amara wore a white gown sewn by careful hands. Her curls were pinned with blossoms. Ethan stood waiting, his expression open and unguarded. When they spoke their vows, there was no spectacle, only truth, only choice.
Applause followed, genuine and warm. The ranch yard filled with laughter, with food and music, with children running beneath tables. The house that once echoed with absence now rang with life. Seasons turned, summer deepened, autumn gilded the fields, winter returned, but it no longer frightened them. The fire never went out. In time, a child's cry joined the household at dawn. Amara lay spent but radiant, cradling a daughter they named Hope. Ethan held them both, tears unhidden, his rough hands gentle as they traced new life. Under the same cottonwood, he later carried the child into sunlight. Amara watched, her heart full. The ranch was no longer a monument to loss. It was a home. And the test that began in silence had ended in truth, proving that love, when offered without condition, could thaw even the longest winter.